Somewhere in the Wind River Basin of Wyoming, a pair of boots is already moving before the sun has fully cleared the horizon. They are not new boots. They are not the boots of a man who bought them for style or comfort. The leather is cracked in the places where a foot bends 10,000 times a season. The mud in the seams is not from yesterday, it is from years, layered and compressed into something almost geological. These boots have walked fence lines in blizzards. They have stood in mud during calving season at 3 in the morning. They have carried a man across 6,000 acres of Wyoming high desert more times than any number could capture. You can tell everything about a working man from his boots, and these boots tell you that the man wearing them has never once considered stopping. His name is Walt Briggs. He is 67 years old, and his day has already begun. Look at the hands of a man who has worked land his entire life, and you are looking at a document more honest than any biography. Walt Briggs's hands are the color of old saddle leather. The knuckles are enlarged from cold weather and hard use. The wedding ring on his left hand, a plain gold band his wife placed there in 1982, has worn so thin that the metal is almost translucent in certain light. She passed 11 years ago. Walt has never taken the ring off. He has never considered taking it off. It belongs there the same way the ranch belongs to him, not by paperwork alone, but by something deeper and older than paperwork. The fence post he grips is gray and splintered. It has been standing in this Wyoming wind since Walt's father put it there in 1974. Walt has repaired it twice. He will repair it again. That is not stubbornness. That is stewardship. The belief that the things left to you by the people who loved you are worth maintaining beyond the point where maintenance makes financial sense. These hands built nothing new. They preserved everything that mattered. There is a kind of greatness in that, even if the world rarely stops to name it. Every evening, if the work allows it, Walt Briggs walks to the far fence line of the north pasture and stands there for a while. He does not do this for any reason he could easily explain. He does not call it meditation or reflection, or any of the words that people in cities use for the practice of being still. He just stands there, looking at his land, watching the cattle settle for the night, feeling the wind come down off the mountains the way it has come down off those mountains, since long before there were any Briggs on this earth to feel it. From a distance, from the distance of the aerial camera that follows him at the end of each day, Walt Briggs looks small. One man, one fence line, an ocean of land around him, and an even greater ocean of sky above. The cattle are dots, the mountains are shapes, and Walt is smaller than all of it. But he is still standing. That is the thing you notice, even from a distance. Even against that enormous sky, he is still standing. And tomorrow morning at 4:45, he will still be here. When the last light goes and the Wyoming stars come out, and they come out in a way that people who have never left a city cannot fully imagine, Walt Briggs does not go inside right away. He stands under them the same way his great-grandfather once stood under them. The same stars, the same wind, the same silence so deep you can hear your own heartbeat if you stop moving long enough to listen. There are 800 cattle on this land tonight. There are fence lines stretching for miles in every direction. There are water sources to check tomorrow, and a tractor with a belt that needs replacing, and a water rights dispute with the county that has been running for 3 years. There is always something. There is always more work than one man can finish. But right now, in this moment, Walt Briggs is standing on his ridge under his stars on his land, and for a few minutes, that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Tomorrow his son will wake up in California and drive a Tesla to a glass office building and write software that millions of people will use. And Walt will wake up at 4:45 and go feed the cattle. And both of them will be exactly where they are supposed to be. And that fact will sit quietly between them, unspoken, on every Sunday phone call for the rest of their lives. Not 5 o'clock. Not 4:30. 4:45, the same as it has been for 40 years. Because that is the time that gives Walt exactly enough margin to drink one full cup of coffee before the first feed run needs to begin. He discovered this timing through trial and error sometime in his 30s and has never adjusted it since. The coffee is black. It has always been black. His wife Margaret used to joke that Walt was the only man she knew who took his coffee the same way he took bad news, straight and without complaint. He sits at the kitchen table for exactly 15 minutes. He reviews the handwritten list he made the night before. He checks the weather through the window, not on a phone, but through the actual window, reading the sky the way his father taught him, looking at the color of the darkness, the direction of the early wind, the feel of the air when he cracked the back door to let the dog out. Then he puts on the gloves, picks up the lantern, and goes to work. There is no music in this morning. There is no podcast. There is only the creak of the floorboards and the sound of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and why he is doing it, moving through the dark toward the barn. The map on Walt's kitchen table is not from Google. It is hand-drawn on graph paper, updated with pencil every few years as the land changes, a new spring appearing after a wet winter, a fence section that collapsed and was rebuilt 6 feet to the east, a section of the south pasture that floods now in ways it never used to. Walt knows this land better than any satellite ever could. He knows where the ground gets soft after rain and where it stays firm. He knows which ridge catches the north wind first in November and which valley stays 10 degrees warmer than everywhere else on the property. He knows where the cattle go when they are sick and where they go when they are happy, and the difference matters. The phone on the table is face down because Walt checks it once in the morning and once in the evening. There is very little that arrives on that phone that cannot wait 12 hours. Daniel calls on Sundays. The county calls about the water rights dispute. Occasionally, someone calls to ask if the ranch is for sale. From 800 feet above the Wind River Basin, the Briggs Ranch looks like something from a painting of the Old West. The land stretches in every direction, further than the eye can comfortably follow. The creek bed cuts through it like a scar that healed clean. The buttes on the southern boundary look the same today as they looked in the photographs Walt's great-grandfather took with a box camera in 1902. 6,000 acres sounds like a large number until you see it from above and realize that in the context of this landscape, it is simply one piece of a much vaster whole. Wyoming does not make a man feel large. It makes a man feel appropriately sized, which is to say small, but purposefully small, the way a single good word is small inside a great sentence. The cattle down there, those tiny dark dots scattered across 3 pastures, each one has a weight, a health history, a temperament that Walt carries in his head. He cannot tell you the population of the nearest city. He cannot tell you who won last night's game. But he can tell you which of those dots has been moving slower than usual this week, and what that probably means, and what he plans to do about it tomorrow morning. That is not ignorance. That is a different kind of knowledge. The kind that keeps 800 animals alive through a Wyoming winter. Walt's great-grandfather homesteaded this land in 1891 with $40, a wagon, 2 horses named Clement and Ruth, and a government land grant that gave him 160 acres if he could improve it within 5 years. He improved it, and then he bought more, and then his son improved that and bought more, and then Walt's father did the same. By the time Walt inherited the ranch in 1987, it had grown to 6,000 acres across 3 separate parcels, with water rights attached to 2 of them and a grazing lease on federal land to the north. Walt did not grow it further. That was never his plan. His plan, his one and only plan, the plan he has held to for 37 years of running this place, was simply to not be the one who loses it. He walks this fence line every week, checking posts, testing wire, looking for the places where the ground has shifted or the weather has weakened what his father built. He repairs what needs repairing, he replaces what cannot be repaired, And every time he drives a new post into this ground, he is doing the same thing his great-grandfather did, making a claim, saying, "I am here, this is mine." There is a room at the end of the hallway in Walt Briggs's ranch house that Walt does not use for storage, does not use as a guest room, and does not change in any way from one year to the next. The poster on the wall is from a band that was popular when Daniel was 15. The textbooks on the shelf are the ones Daniel used in his junior year of high school. Calculus, AP Biology, American Literature. Subjects that pointed clearly even then toward a future that had nothing to do with cattle. The debate team ribbon is blue and gold. First place at the regional competition in Riverton in 2001. Walt drove 4 hours round trip to watch that debate. He sat in the back of the gymnasium in his good shirt and his least-worn boots, and watched his son stand at a podium and argue with a precision and confidence that Walt recognized but could not quite explain. He drove home alone that night because Daniel stayed to celebrate with his teammates. Walt put the ribbon on the shelf when Daniel left for college. He has not moved it since. The dust on that shelf is 2 decades deep. Walt is not a man who neglects his house. He cleans the kitchen every night. He sweeps the porch every Sunday. But he does not dust Daniel's room. He is not ready to disturb it. He does not examine that feeling too closely, because he already knows what it means. In the graduation photo, Daniel Briggs is smiling the way a person smiles when they believe without reservation that everything ahead of them is going to be exactly what they hoped. He was 17 in that photograph. He had already been accepted to Stanford on a full academic scholarship. He had already decided, though he had not yet told his father, that he was not coming back to run the ranch. He had made that decision quietly and privately sometime in his junior year. The way you make decisions that you know will hurt someone you love. Carefully, and only after you are completely certain there is no other way. Walt framed the photo himself. He drove to the drugstore in Riverton to have it developed and framed. He put it on the shelf before Daniel even came home from graduation. The rodeo ribbon beside it is from when Daniel was 12, a participation ribbon, not a winner's ribbon, because Daniel was never going to be a rodeo champion. He was always going to be something else. Walt knew that even then. He put the ribbon on the shelf anyway, because his son had tried, and trying mattered, regardless of the outcome. The Bible's cracked spine is from Walt's hands, not Daniel's. Walt reads it at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings before he makes the call. Mountain View, California, sits in the middle of the most concentrated accumulation of technological wealth and human intelligence the world has ever seen in one place. The air smells of money and possibility. The coffee costs $6 and is genuinely excellent. The traffic is a nightmare, and nobody agrees on whose fault that is. Daniel Briggs drives to work every morning in a car that parks itself. He works in a building where the snacks are free and the chairs cost $800, and nobody thinks either of those things is unusual. He is good at his job, very good, the kind of good that gets you promoted ahead of schedule and asked to lead projects that matter. His colleagues respect him. His manager tells him twice a year that he has a real future at the company. He does have a real future at the company. That is not the question. The question, the one that arrives uninvited on certain evenings when the work is done and the apartment is quiet, is a different kind of question entirely. From 2,000 feet above Silicon Valley on a core night, you cannot see a single star. A city light erases them completely. Walt has never been to Silicon Valley, but Walt sees the Milky Way from his back porch every clear night of his life. He has never once considered that a small thing.
I think I found the anomaly in the data stream.
Let me see that. Could be what we're looking for.
Just need to run one more simulation.
Daniel is good at this world. He was always going to be good at this world. From the time he was 9 years old and took apart his father's old radio to see how it worked, and put it back together correctly, and got the classical station from Casper coming in clearer than it ever had before. From that moment on, Walt knew his son was made for something his father could not fully understand. Walt did not resent that. He wants to be clear about that. Whenever the subject comes up, he did not resent it then, he does not resent it now. A man who resents his child for becoming what they were born to become is a man who loves his own comfort more than his child's life. Walt Briggs is not that man. But there is a difference between resentment and grief. Walt understands both well enough to tell them apart. Resentment is a fire. Grief is a weather. It comes and goes, it changes with the season. It is not always bad, but it is always present somewhere in the background, the way the mountains are always present on the horizon, even when you are not looking at them. Daniel built something real inside this glass building. Walt built something real out in that wind. The tragedy, if it is a tragedy, and some days it feels more like just the shape of things, is that neither of them can fully inhabit the other's world long enough to understand it from the inside. This is the first time we see Walt Briggs's face directly. We held it back deliberately, through the boots, through the hands, through the silhouette against the sunset, because a face seen too early becomes a photograph. A face that arrives after you already know a man's story becomes a window. Walt Briggs does not look like a man who is suffering. That is the first thing you notice. He does not look bitter or defeated, or worn down in the spirit, only in the skin. The lines on his face are not the lines of a man who has been broken by his life. They are the lines of a man who has been shaped by it. The way a good piece of wood is shaped by the hand that works it, with pressure and patience, and the knowledge of what it can and cannot become. His eyes are the thing. They are the eyes of a man who has learned the difference between the things he can change and the things he cannot, and who has made a genuine peace with that distinction. Not a resigned peace, not a defeated peace, a chosen peace, the kind that costs something to arrive at, and is therefore worth having. Walt does not talk much about Daniel, not because it is a wound he cannot touch, but because he considers it a private matter between a father and a son. And private matters belong to the people inside them, not to anyone looking in from outside. But if you ask him directly, and give him a moment to find the words, he will tell you this: the boy turned out exactly right. And that has to be enough.
You've reached Danny. Leave a message.
Every Sunday morning, at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock California time, Walt picks up the phone and calls Daniel. The phone rings. Sometimes Daniel answers on the second ring, and they talk for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The weather in both places, something Walt saw on the ranch that week, something Daniel heard in the news that seemed like it might affect cattle prices. They are not always comfortable conversations. They are not uncomfortable either. They are the conversations of two people who love each other and have run out of the language to say so directly, and have therefore constructed an entire architecture of small talk to live inside instead. Sometimes Daniel does not answer. The phone rings 4 times and goes to voicemail. Walt does not leave messages. He tried leaving messages in the early years, and they always came out wrong, too much in them or not enough. The silence at the end, always stretching past what was comfortable. Now he just waits. He puts the phone face down on the kitchen counter. He pours another cup of coffee. He sits at the kitchen table with the land grant documents, or the water rights paperwork, or the breeding records, and he works for another hour. Then he tries again next Sunday. He has never once skipped a Sunday. "5:30 in the morning. The feed run. 800 cattle do not wait for a convenient time. They do not respect weekends or holidays or the mornings when Walt's back has stiffened overnight from an old injury that never quite healed. They are hungry when they are hungry, and they are hungry every morning, and Walt is there every morning, which is the fundamental and non-negotiable contract of the ranching life. The truck covers 4 sections before 8 o'clock. 14 miles of dirt road in the pre-dawn and early morning light, stopping every quarter mile to cut bales and spread hay in long arcs that the cattle have already learned to anticipate. They hear the truck coming from half a mile away. By the time Walt stops and climbs into the bed, the first animals are already moving toward him from across the field, not running, because cattle do not run toward things as a rule, but moving with a purposeful, steady drift that adds up to hundreds of animals arriving at roughly the same time from every point of the compass. Walt knows most of them by sight. He is watching for the ones that do not come. That is the real purpose of the morning feed run, not the hay, though the hay matters, but the count, the check, the daily confirmation that all 800 are present and moving normally and nothing has gone wrong overnight. Most mornings everything is fine, some mornings it is not. Walt has learned to tell the difference between the two kinds of mornings before the sun is fully up, simply by watching which animals come to the truck and which ones stay back.
All right, old girl, just a little mud here. We'll get you fixed right up. Just a bit of ointment and you'll be fine.
By mid-morning, Walt has already made a dozen medical decisions that no veterinarian was consulted on, because the nearest large animal vet is 60 miles away and charges $200 for a farm call, and Walt has been making these decisions for 37 years, and his record is good. The heifer on the south fence line has a slight hitch in her right rear step that Walt noticed 2 days ago. Today he catches her, lifts the foot, and finds what he expected: early-stage foot rot, caught in time because Walt was watching. He cleans it, applies the treatment from the field kit he carries in the truck, makes a note in the small notebook he keeps in his coat pocket, and marks the heifer for a follow-up check on Thursday. This is the invisible labor of ranching, the thousands of small observations and micro-decisions that never appear on any balance sheet, but are the entire reason 800 animals are alive and healthy on this property. A rancher who stops paying attention loses animals. Walt has not stopped paying attention in 37 years. He does not plan to start. He moves to the next animal, then the next. The morning passes the way all Walt's mornings pass, not quickly and not slowly, but with the steady, purposeful rhythm of a man who has more to do than he can finish, and has made a complete peace with that fact.
All right. This clause about secondary usage needs clarification. The water rights don't cover that.
Lunch is 20 minutes. It has always been 20 minutes. Walt eats standing at the counter or sitting at the table, depending on how the morning went, and he reads something while he eats, usually the water rights documents, because the county dispute has been running for 3 years, and the paperwork is extensive, and it does not read itself. The water rights dispute is, in Walt's estimation, the single greatest threat to the ranch's long-term survival. More than the land prices, more than the operating costs, more than the increasingly unpredictable weather. Without the water rights on the north section, he cannot sustain the herd through a dry summer, and the dry summers have been getting longer and more frequent for the past decade. Walt does not describe himself as someone who worries. He describes himself as someone who prepares. The distinction matters to him. Worry is passive. Preparation is active. He has been preparing for this water rights fight for 3 years, reading every document, writing every letter himself on the kitchen table after dinner, driving to Riverton once a month to meet with the county water board in his good shirt and his least-worn boots. He has not won yet. He has not given up yet. Those are the only two facts that matter, and only one of them is going to remain true. By 4 in the afternoon, Walt is on horseback. Not because a truck would be faster, but because certain parts of the ranch are only properly checked on horseback. And because Walt's relationship with the 2 horses in his barn is one of the uncomplicated pleasures of a life that is largely defined by complication. The fence check covers the perimeter of the north and east sections, the sections where the land meets the federal grazing allotment, and where the fence condition matters most, legally and practically. He moves at a walk, one hand on the reins, and his eyes moving constantly between the fence line and the land beyond it, looking for the things that do not belong: a broken wire, a displaced post, a section where cattle have been pushing against the boundary, which tells him something about the grass and water distribution on the inside. From horseback, at this pace, in this light, the ranch looks the way it must have looked to his great-grandfather in 1895. The mountains on the horizon are the same mountains, the grass bending in the same wind, the light coming down in the same long golden angles across the same dry and beautiful earth. Walt does not romanticize this. He is practical enough to know that romanticizing a thing is a way of not dealing with it honestly, but he is also honest enough to admit that there are moments, out here in the late afternoon on a good horse, with the light doing what it is doing right now, when this life feels like exactly the right life. Not the easiest life, not the most comfortable or financially rewarding or socially recognized life. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in March of 2022. It came in a cream-colored envelope with a Denver return address, on paper that was heavier than any paper Walt kept in his house, and it was addressed to Walter R. Briggs in a font that cost more than Walt's monthly fuel bill to license. Walt read the first paragraph while standing at the kitchen counter. Then he set the letter down on the table. He poured a cup of coffee, he sat down, he placed the coffee cup on top of the letter, and looked out the window at the north pasture for approximately 3 minutes. Then he got up, put the letter in the recycling bin, and drove out to check the water sources on the east section. He did not call Daniel about it. He did not call his neighbor Bill Hawkins, who had received a similar letter the year before and spent 6 months agonizing over it before eventually, reluctantly signing. He did not tell anyone about it for 4 months, and then only mentioned it in passing to the woman at the county records office when she asked how things were going. Fine, Walt told her. Some company wanted to buy the ranch. What did you tell them? She asked. Walt picked up his copy of the water rights filing, sent the letter back, he said, and then he thanked her and left. Walt Briggs will be up at 4:45 tomorrow morning. The cattle will need feeding. The fence on the north section needs a post replaced before the next hard wind. The water rights hearing is in 6 weeks, and the brief is not finished. The tractor belt that has been giving him trouble will not fix itself. There is always more work than one man can finish. Walt has known this his entire adult life. He stopped being troubled by it sometime in his 40s, when he finally understood that the point was not to finish. The point was to keep going. His son is in California right now. It is 2 hours earlier there. Daniel is probably still at the office or just leaving, merging onto the freeway in a car that cost more than Walt's tractor. Daniel is probably fine. Daniel is almost certainly fine. Walt told him to call if he wasn't, and Daniel has not called, so Walt chooses to take that as good news. The star appearing in the upper corner of the Wyoming sky is Venus. Walt's wife Margaret used to point it out on evenings like this one, standing at this same fence, before everything changed. Walt still looks for it every clear evening. He has never stopped looking for it. He sits for another few minutes. The light fades. The cattle settle. The wind comes down off the mountains one more time the way it always has, and always will, long after Walt Briggs and every memory of him has returned to this earth he loved so much. Then he climbs down from the fence rail, puts his hat back on, and walks back toward the house and the one warm light he left burning in the kitchen window. Tomorrow at 4:45, he will do it all again. That is enough. That has always been enough.